Welcome to Noel for GCSE. So we are beginning all of the English literature live streams with this first one, Much Ado About Nothing. I hope you've had a good Sunday and you're ready for some revision for the night before the exam. So this is going to be an hour long, and this is the structure. So we're going to go through firstly the extract question structure, which is specific to AQA, but it will only take about a couple of minutes to go through. Then we'll be looking at the grade 8 and 9 approach versus the grade 6 or 7 approach to actually what to do in the exam. And then we'll be looking at my exemplar model answer, which got 4 marks. So just before we get started, I have already released some Much Ado About Nothing essays as videos. So I would recommend watching them. They have some really good essay plans. So the essay that I'll be going through in this video is different to those ones so that you can use them all of the resources as much as you can. So I would recommend going to watch those. Okay, now let's get started onto Much Ado About Nothing exam question structures and best approaches. If you're asking how my day has been, it's been very good. It's very nice and sunny outside. I hope your guys' days have been good as well. So we're going to begin by looking at the exam question structure. Now, it's quite straightforward. So you've got the extract, and then you've got starting from this moment in the play, explore how this theme or this character is presented. This is the same across the all Shakespeare texts, and this is the AQA structure. Now, I believe there are 2 different ways to approach this. So you've got the grade 6 or 7 approach or the grade 8 or 9 approach. So going through the 6 or 7 approach, what you have is you have your introduction, you have your 2 or 3 paragraphs, and in your introduction, you're just summarizing your 3 points. In your paragraphs, you say 1 paragraph about the extract, 1 paragraph about the text. And your conclusion just summarizes that. I believe that if you want to aim for a higher grade, you might want to try this approach. Both approaches are quite good, and you can actually get a higher grade with the first one, but it'll be a bit more difficult to do. Now, with this grade 8 or 9 approach, you start with your introduction. What you want to do is plug in your AO3, your context, and your unique line of argument. So you want to ensure that you have a unique perspective on things. And how do you expect to have a unique perspective? Well, all of my videos that I've released, I've tried to give you guys as many of my ideas as possible so you can use them. Now, each paragraph is you're going to have 2 or 3 paragraphs, probably 2, and each paragraph is at least a page long. And you'll begin with a point from the extract. You will then have your quote, your analysis, and then you'll use your extract as a trampoline to bounce to other areas of the text, supporting or even challenging your point. Of course, a lot of people wouldn't have heard of it because this is the grade 8 or 9 approach. If everybody knew about it, everybody would be getting those top grades. And your conclusion will just have you evaluating contextual larger ideas about the question. For example, if they're asking you about deception, you want to think wider ideas. What's Shakespeare's message to society about deception? Now, this might be unfamiliar to you, but don't worry, we'll be going through the essay where that approach is visible. Now, the golden method for analysis, which I want to get through in all of my live streams, is that what you want to do is you want to embed your quotes. You don't want to just have the quote is colon. You want to embed them as you're speaking about them. And also, this is a special method that I used to use to get those top marks. So you would begin by analyzing the quote and say, on the surface, it appears whatever. And then you would say, upon deeper inspection, there is an implicit meaning, or there is a wider meaning or a deeper meaning for the rest of society that extends beyond just talking about the characters in the book or play or whatever. Okay, so those are all of my advice for the structure. We're now going to look at the practice and model answer. I want you guys to kind of practice with me as if you were given this in your exam. How would you deal with it? Now, this isn't a predicted question or anything like that. It's just a practice question. So it'll look like this. Read the following extract from Act 2, Scene 2 of Much Ado About Nothing, and then answer the question that follows. Then they give you a little bit of information about it. So at this point in the play, Don John has learned of Claudio and Hero's upcoming marriage and has begun a scheme to prevent that from happening. So this is the extract. You can see I've highlighted some things, and that's to do with the essay that I prepared for you guys. So beginning, let's read it. Don John says, "It is so, the Count Claudio shall marry the daughter of Leonato." Barrachio says, "Yea, my lord, but I can cross it." Don John says, "Any bar, any cross, any impediment will be medicinable to me. I am sick in displeasure to him, and whatever comes athwart his affections ranges evenly with mine. How canst thou cross this marriage?" So you're not expected to understand every single word, but hopefully you have familiarity and a general gist of what's going on, and you can pick out certain quotes you're familiar with. So the one I've highlighted is quite a common quote, talking about any impediment will be medicinable to me. And I'll talk about that in a second when we're talking about the plan that I've made. Okay. Barrachio says, "No, not honestly, my lord, but so covertly that no dishonesty shall appear in me." Don John says, "Show me briefly how." Barrachio says, "I think I told your lordship a year since how much I'm in favour of Margaret, the waiting gentlewoman of Hero." So this is just a subplot that's not too relevant. So not everything given in the extract is important to focus on. Don John says, "I remember." Barrachio says, just talking more about that. And then Don John says, "What life is in that to be the death of this marriage?" Barrachio says, "The poison of that lies in you to temper. Go you to the prince, your brother, spare not to tell him that he hath wronged his honour in marrying the renowned Claudio, whose estimation do you mightily hold up a contaminated stale." I.e., what this means is that the literal plot where you've got Claudio and he mistakes Barrachio and Margaret for being Hero, and he thinks Hero is having an affair, okay, as they're embracing each other. And Don John says, "What proof shall I make of that?" So Barrachio says, "Proof enough to misuse the prince, to vex Claudio." So he knows it's going to annoy Claudio and to undo Hero. Unfortunately, the person that's going to get worse affected by this is Hero. So let's now look at the question. I would actually recommend looking at the question before you look at the extract, just so you know what you're looking for. Now, the question says, "Starting with this speech, explore how Shakespeare presents ideas about deception in Much Ado About Nothing." Now, I chose the theme of deception to do a live stream about, because this has so many sub themes that you can actually, there's a lot of transferable quotes and analysis that I'm giving you that you can use in your exam to get those top grades. So that's the question, and we're looking at ideas about deception. So I've highlighted a couple of quotes there. The first quote, as I said, "Any impediment will be medicinable to me." So what does that mean? Well, even though we're asked about deception, I've noticed that Don John is heavily linked to deception. Pretty much he is the cause of any mishap. All of the things that go wrong, he is the main cause to point to. Of course, there's lots of intricacies about some hints about what's wrong with society, how Claudio just initially blames Hero without any sort of fairness. And the same with Hero's father not even believing her. So there's a lot of sub issues, but the main issue, if you had to point to a villain, it would be Don John. Okay. Now, the second point I was thinking about was when you see the words like the poison of that, death, contaminated stale, kill. So you can see that deception often links to or leads to a lot of deathly connotations. So looking at this, let's now make our plan. Now, as I spoke about, this is the grade 8 or 9 approach. So what I did was with each point, I made 3 points based on the extract. And not all 3 points are based on them, but at least 2 of them are based on the extract. And then what I'll do in the paragraph is then use that extract to trampoline onto other areas of the text to either support my point or even challenge it. So here you can see my plan. Paragraph 1, using Don John as a vessel for deception and how he causes destruction and disharmony. Paragraph 2, Deception is glorified through heroic characters who manipulate fate to their liking. Don Pedro, hypocrisy. So, what I mean by that and how I got that idea is when I started doing a mind map, and I didn't show it on the PowerPoint, but I did a mind map, and that's how I tended to plan things when I was in the exam. And when I saw Don John, I was thinking, okay, foils for Don John, that's Don Pedro. Hopefully, if you don't know what foils are, that means a character contrast. So if you have a villain, then that's going to be the hero, the opposites. So Don John, Don Pedro are going to be the foils. And I noticed that it's not just Don John who's doing all the deception. Don Pedro was also doing deception when he was trying to get Claudio and Hero together. He pretended to be Claudio so he could woo Hero, and that is all about deception. So paragraph 2 is talking about how deception is glorified when you're talking about heroic characters, but villainized when you're talking about characters who simply were born out of wedlock. Okay, so hopefully that's a unique perspective you haven't seen before, and you can steal that for your exam. And then the third paragraph, well done for those actually talking in the chat, that's really good. For the third paragraph, it's that deception is used to mock or satirize, which means to make a judgment about society and how they're doing things wrong, how easily women's worth would be discarded just based on hearsay. So hearsay was just a quote, and that meant like gossip and things like that. And you should be familiar with that from the text. Okay, so now let's actually go through the model answer. Hopefully that's giving you an introduction as to what we are doing. Now let's look at the actual introduction. Shakespeare presents deception as duly the spawn of evil characters, as well as the device used by the plotting protagonists, elaborate schemes. For example, when they're trying to get Benedict and Beatrice to be together, Hero and Claudio to be together, etc. To explore the human folly and satirize how humans act inconsistent to their relayed beliefs. Thank you guys for the appreciation. It means a lot. Thank you, Luke. Okay, so just breaking this down, because I know it's very there's a lot of high level language, and I want you guys to be able to benefit from this and use all of these phrases to your advantage. So I'm talking about human folly. Human folly is basically thinking about the mistakes that humans make and just making fun of them in the form of plays. So hopefully you understand what this means, how humans act inconsistent to their relayed beliefs. For example, they think they're morally perfect, but then they're going to use deception to get people together, and that will affect their whole married life. They'll be together for the rest of their life, and you're going to do that and then still claim you're being moral. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, and that is the beginning of the introduction. There's still a little bit left actually, and then I said a message that has resonance with both the contemporary and modern audience. So in your introduction you want to talk a bit about context, you want to talk a bit about your audience. You don't actually get any validation for introductions according to the mark scheme. However, if you begin to talk about AO3, you actually do get marks. So it's only worth doing an introduction if you're going to talk about context. And that's what I recommend to you guys. And also mentioning things like the audience. Contemporary means audience of that time. Modern is audience now. So, and a key term, which I would always recommend using in your literature essays, is resonance. Resonance means that it has meaning, or for example, it creates such a detailed picture in your minds just by words. Okay, so we're now going to look at the first paragraph. Shakespeare characterizes Don John as an evil mechanism to catalyze the destruction of harmony in the play. Now, this is a nice, clear line of argument. I've not just mentioned harmony because it's a good word to use, but harmony is actually one of the main stages in a play. So it's the play is sort of like a roller coaster, or when you used to do story maps in primary school, it would be like a mountain shape because there will be a climax and the rising action, etc. So harmony is just one of the parts of that. the initial part. Now, Don John is the evil mechanism which causes or catalyzes the destruction of that initial harmony. So harmony is always in the beginning. Everyone is happy, etc. Okay. Then, in the extract, so make it clear that you're talking about the extract, Don John voices, any impediment to him will be medicinable to me. Through this honest declaration and assertion, Don John, on a surface level, is portrayed as a destructive force that is hungry for the downfall of others. So here I've got a lot of things to talk about. So we just said honest declaration and assertion. So declaration and assertion, we are categorizing what we've just said. So what type of sentence is it? Because that's important as well. Is it an exclamative? Are you shouting it? Is it a small phrase? Is it a complex sentence? Always talk about that because it's showing your understanding of that. And you can also talk about greater things in depth. Now, on a surface level, that's the technique I was discussing. So Don John on a surface level, which means initially, is portrayed as a destructive force that is hungry for the downfall of others, always praying for the downfall of other people. Okay, and by saying on a surface level, it suggests to whoever's reading your essay, the examiner, that you're then going to talk about on a deeper level. So you're literally guiding them to this is why I need to give you more marks. I would do Great Expectations. However, I do not have enough time to do it for this GCSE series. I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to do as many texts as possible. So now we're going to talk about zooming in. So the adjective medicinable exposes that motif of illness, because obviously you can see the link of medicine there, which parallels the sense that Don John's only intentions are harmful to life. So what you want to do is you want to take a quote, you want to take what it represents or what kind of connotations that has, and then you want to parallel that to whatever a greater meaning is. So the Don John's intentions are harmful to life, just how diseases are harmful to life. The motif of illness is also seen earlier in Don John's soliloquy. So here is the trampoline bit. We're using the extract to bounce around the rest of the text. I would rather be a canker in the hedge than a rose in his grace. The connotations of canker elicit images of a disease, because that's what it meant in those times. And it conjures up the inference that Don John is unwanted and cast out from society. Thank you, Luke. That means a lot. I'm so glad that you're finding this helpful. And that's what I wanted. That's why when I was doing my exams, I wish there was a resource like this that could help guide you, especially with texts that were not as popular as Macbeth. So I'm glad it's helpful. So it elicits images of a disease and conjures up the inference that Don John is unwanted. He's cast out from society and doesn't deserve to be there. Okay, so just like an illness, remember if you think about people who used to have leprosy, they were literally cast out from society, and they treat Don John with the same disrespect. And the reason why is because he's illegitimate. This can be traced back from the awkward revelation of Don John being a bastard. So this is when they first came to the village in Italy. It was very awkward tension because everybody knew that he was illegitimate. And it's kind of this thing that followed you around during that period, during the contemporary period. There was a lot of prejudice against you. Which has further connotations of sickliness. So the word bastard itself actually has a lot of links to illness. So that's the original meaning of it. And therefore, it highlights the ill fortune and illegitimacy. I love that part because it's linking illness to being born out of wedlock, and that is really perfect. Of those born out of wedlock, being unfairly cast out of society. Okay, moving on. Shakespeare possibly implies that as cause to Don John's entering the world in a destructive and shameful manner against the confines of marriage, which would have been heavily prejudiced in both modern and contemporary society, that he can only continue that path as a villain to conjure up more deception. So, what I mean is, because Shakespeare suggesting that because he was born out of wedlock, he was already committing sin just being alive, and therefore his life can only continue in that manner. He can only keep committing more sin, as society will never accept him. So it's interesting to comment on whether that is satire or not. Okay, during the contemporary period, bastards were struck out from society and disadvantaged evil from birth. Hence, perhaps by Shakespeare submitting to this assertion, i.e., he's suggesting that Don John should be cast out, and even extending this societal stance into adulthood, i.e., because Don John is still evil now, so obviously with Don John, because he's such an obviously villain character, that it highlights the implicit, ridiculous belief system that evil nature is determined at birth. So perhaps I've taken it on the view that Shakespeare's possibly saying that this societal view is completely unfounded and wrong, that a person their characteristic can't be determined by something like that. Thank you, Milkshake, for that. Okay. Moving on. Through an alternative lens, it's important to say phrases like that because it shows to the examiner you're considering another perspective. So, through an alternative lens, the audience can perhaps draw sympathy towards Don John through the notion that most of his expressions go unheard. So, with this point, I've just suggested that mostly Don John is ignored. So now I have to then back that point up or explain it in soliloquies or asides. So that is therefore the explaining done. So you'll notice that most of Don John's speech is literally by himself in soliloquies or asides, or rarely you can see a conversation with Borachio here. So literally highlights they're literally putting him in isolation. It's almost like they're purposefully breeding a villain so that they can therefore back up their point that he is a bad person. He admits and perhaps forfeits, I cannot hide what I am. And in that moment, you can argue that he has the audience's sympathy there because it's just unfair to be cast out like that. Nonetheless, Don John is used by Shakespeare as a device to manipulate and steer the rising action and climax of the play through his evil intent. This is an important point here because now I'm going back to the first line of the paragraph where I was speaking about him disrupting the harmony. I then spend the last line here talking about the rising action climax. So you always want to create a way to implicitly link back to your first point in the paragraph. So you're to link back to the beginning of the paragraph. I hope that makes sense. Okay, we're now going to move on to paragraph 2. Now you can see that my paragraphs are quite in depth. Yours might not be of the same standard, but if you go through all of this video and also my essay plan videos that are available on YouTube, I'll definitely say that you'll do well because of all of this really good lines of argument. So moving on, we've got, however, the foil to Don John Don Pedro can also be seen as a glorified character who harnesses deception to determine outcomes. Now, Don Pedro, alongside other secondary characters, are duly seen to manufacture elaborate schemes in order to orchestrate romantic couplings. So I didn't just get these high level words out of thin air. Before I'd done a lot of research, and I would think of words and I would think synonyms of words, I'll search them up, and that's where I'll get words like orchestrate, manufacturing, elaborate schemes, etc. So you don't have to do that. I've literally saved you the time because you can just take them from here. But yeah, that's what I used to do. When discussing the elaborate Benedict and Beatrice plot, he eagerly cites, "If we shall do this, we shall be the only love gods." Now, the noun gods connotes this sense of power and superiority in position and rank, which the character of Don Pedro seems to already be highly familiar with. We know Don Pedro is the most high ranking character in the entire of Much Ado. And that's why everybody is always seeking his approval. They need to ask him if they want Hero and Claudio to get married, etc. So it's just, it's almost like he's the leader. Don Pedro is also introduced as a strongly militant character. Okay, so they literally came from a battle. Who powerfully supersedes Leonato via dominating conversationally and initiating introductions. So he starts by saying, "I think this is your daughter." Perhaps Don Pedro's plan to couple Beatrice and Benedict is covertly a way to ultimately submit Beatrice to the standards of the patriarchy. That is such a good point. Really well done. I think that's such an amazing point, and you should definitely put that in your essay. And well done for sharing it as well. That's a really good point. Okay, I'm actually really impressed. Well done. So, going back, so who powerfully supersedes Leonato via dominating conversationally. So you can see that he's dominating most of the dialogue, and that's you talking about structure. So even though you're not using a quote in that bit, you're still using evidence. And he initiated the introductions. He forced it across. He says, "I think this is your daughter." Now, most of the time, people introduce themselves or they introduce whoever they know. So, "I think this is your daughter" is really quite forward of a person to do. Now, the positive portrayal of the powerful and charismatic Don Pedro thus seems to glorify and whiten his reliance on deception and trickery, especially through the tool of masquerade. So now we're talking about another theme of masquerade. And I think I've done a video on that as well, talking about loads of points you can make there. So what I'm saying there is Don Pedro is manipulating others, but they're glorifying it because it's all in the name of love. So even if they could absolutely hate each other when they end up married, because there was good intent at the beginning, it's completely fine. And I think QWERTY's point there is really, really good. Now, both Don Pedro and Don John use their influence on certain characters in order to maneuver and mask the realities. However, due to the legitimateness of Don Pedro, the audience become more receptive to a more selfless gain, as opposed to the deep-seated exploiting and cunning Don John. So obviously Don John seems to have a bit more harmful intentions, so it's easier to point the finger at him, but what I'm saying is we still can't forget the evil Don Pedro. Okay, we're now on to paragraph 3. So we're doing really well here. If anybody else has any good ideas, feel free to share them, and they're quite nice to look at, actually. They're quite refreshing. Okay, Deception is also used as a mechanism within Much Ado About Nothing in order to satirize how easily women's value can be discarded through mere words. Okay, so through mere gossip, Hero was literally completely ripped apart by society. No one even asked her if it was true, which is just the funniest thing. So within the extract, so we're going back to using the extract. In our second paragraph, you notice that we kind of diverted away from it. So I would recommend that if you're going to use a point that's not necessarily based initially from the extract, do that in your second paragraph so that you can come back to using the extract in your third one. Now, so to satirize how easily women's value can be discarded through mere words, within the extract, Shakespeare tactfully employs a semantic field of death and suffering, which can be seen. Well done, Milkshake. There's some good quotes there. So here is the semantic field of death. You've got death, poison, lies, contaminated, stale, kill. Through this method, Shakespeare implicitly uses foreshadow and verbal irony. So notice there's different types of irony. You've got verbal irony, situational irony, dramatic irony. You can search up the differences later, but it's good to differentiate from that. Yeah, Leonardo literally loses it. That's correct. To imply the rising action that will hold the equivalence to death and life. So it's a nice phrase there saying that the words of death kind of they foreshadow, they're suggesting that or they're hinting at later on how they're literally going to accuse her of dying, or they suggest that she should die because of the death-like shame. Now, the innocent hero, who was initially presented as the epitome of female virtue. I mean, compared to Beatrice, Hero was literally a saint, a living saint. Lamentably, which just means unfortunately, she faces this later in Much Ado About Nothing through her father's crushing slanders and accusations. This is what you guys are talking about in the chat. Death would have brought less shame. This hurtful dialogue to the victim, his daughter, Hero, coupled with the dramatic irony of the false allegations, then projects the cynical satire of the idea that even the most virtuous, meek, subservient female characters have the inherent capacity to be promiscuous. Okay, let me read the chat because a lot of people have been saying things. 1 second. One of the male characters, the only one to question Hero's defamation, is the friar, a man committed to chastity, so able to take an objective view on the situation. Really well done and really good memory of that. I guess you can say she dies of humiliation. Exactly. Fall into a pit of ink. Oh my gosh, that's the quote that we're going to talk about soon. So really good. Hero has been physically stained. Well done. Shows how female sexuality is intrinsically linked to reputation. Exactly. And this last line here, which I said that even the most virtuous women have the inherent capacity to be promiscuous, there's a sense of male anxiety. They're really scared. It's like they're going mad about it. That any sort of signal that women give, it means that they are being unfaithful. Okay. Now, it can then be implied how Shakespeare exposes the folly of humans. So this is how we're linking it to the folly. He's ridiculing the behaviors of people. And just a point to link to that, which is quite interesting actually, that's another reason why Shakespeare sets a lot of his most famous plays in other countries. Of course, it's tropical and that helps make the romantic mood and setting. But another reason is because if he's making fun of people in other countries, he would not be subject to people who are watching it in England getting annoyed because he's making fun of them. So if the average person who lived in the Shakespearean times or the Elizabethan times went and watched a Shakespeare play in the Globe Theatre, they wouldn't think they were being made fun of. They would think the Italians are being made fun of. So it's quite interesting. Benedict having the most soliloquies is a clear sign of his insecurity. He constantly looks to the audience for comfort and is often mocked. Oh, that's a really interesting point. Well done. I like that. I like the points in the chat. That's really nice. I love this live stream. I think this is one of my favorite live streams so far. You guys are really getting involved. Okay. Now, it can then be implied by Shakespeare exposes the folly of humans in being so easily susceptible to manipulation. They're so gullible, especially Claudio, but in many cases, Leonato as well. That linking to the title nothing can cause such an uproar. So just always try and link in the title in any points you can. So Much Ado About Nothing, it literally talks about how such a big uproar is made about literally nothing, about lies and manipulation. And here is the quote that I think Luke gave in the chat. So Leonato further laments, she hath fallen into a pit of ink. This metaphor, on a surface level, again, we're talking about the surface level, on a surface level, reads to emphasize the drowning of heroes' reputation and the permanence that it bears. Upon deeper inspection, it can be inferred by the audience that ink connotes gossip. Now, a key thing that I need to make you guys aware of, if you're not already, is the difference between inferring and implying. So, implying is suggesting that the writer or the playwright is trying to tell the audience something or the reader something, whereas inferring is the audience taking something from the play themselves. So you need to make that distinction when you're using the two words implying or inferring. If the audience is working something out, then you say infer. If the writer is telling them something, that's implying. Now, let's keep going. Okay, so upon deeper inspection, it can be inferred by the audience that ink connotes gossip and hearsay, as we spoke about. Now, which can incredulously terminate all the humility that a woman stands for. Shakespeare perhaps heavily debates the contemporary fragility of the view of women and exposes the absurdity of how male paranoia creates illusory allegations. Okay, so there I'm talking about how it a single shred of evidence which is not even valid evidence, like they'll trust John, who is literally a villain and started a war against them. They'll trust his word more than they'll trust or even listen to heroes, which is quite interesting. And on top of that, it completely terminates anything that a woman stands for, and the whole relationship simply broken by that. And Shakespeare perhaps heavily debates the contemporary fragility of the view of women. He's suggesting that this is wrong. If it was that fragile, then it will easily break, and it often does. Okay, I'm going to now read the chat because I've seen some more. So, would you say that Shakespeare is trying to suggest women should be treated better, or is he using it for comedy, as women of the time being treated this way was common? So it's for comedy instead. I think, yeah, exactly, both to an extent, because we can't just suggest that Shakespeare was a complete feminist, and he wanted to radicalize society. If he was that way, perhaps he would make it more stronger messages in his play. Perhaps it's just the case that he's just reflecting the views of the time. And he's using it as a comedic effect because he's talking about women can't be untrustworthy. So you could go on either side of the fence here, but I wouldn't think that he was an ultimate feminist because of that. And also he didn't really want women to act in his plays, so I'm not sure about that. But yes, good question. That's a really good question. Okay, so that was a lot quicker than I expected. I enjoyed this so much. So the reason why I didn't do a conclusion is because I had evaluative points at the end of each of the paragraphs, and I think I ran out of time because I was trying to do 6 essays for today. But that is the end of that essay. Since we have 20 minutes, I was wondering if you guys wanted to do some more practice on Much Ado About Nothing, possibly some questions and looking at planning them, or however you want to, what would you like to do? Can I link the essay? I've written it in terms of the PowerPoint, so I might, um, I'll try and do that, but it might be late because I'm literally doing back-to-back live streaming for the rest of the day. But that's a good idea. I'll try and do that. So yeah, would you guys like to keep doing some revision? I've actually got another Much Ado About Nothing sort of essay plan that we can go through. You've been really good in this live stream so far. Well done. Yeah, I think I actually have another Much Ado About Nothing resource that we can review. Just bear with me. Masquerade. So let's talk about Masquerade. This is a video that I haven't released too much. Yeah, I haven't released much about, so it's worth doing. Okay, let me just download this. I hope your guys' revision is going well. How's the weekend been? Have you found it good to revise, or have you found it very difficult compared to like in between exams? What do you think? I'm just getting the PowerPoint up. Okay. So this was an unreleased video that I haven't actually released yet, but we'll go through the essay plan since you've got your exam tomorrow, so it makes sense. I find English more annoying to revise generally, but the exams I've done so far have gone well. That's amazing. Yeah. English is a bit more harder to do. I guess it's just kind of exam practice and that's all. So let's actually, what we should do is for the rest of this next 20 minutes, what we'll do is we'll have a discussion about possible points because a lot of you guys are making some really good points. And it's all about having all of those points in your head and then trying to put as many as you can into the question because you want to link it as well as possible. What would you recommend to revise as last minute revision? I mean, I would say kind of just get maybe a A3 or a big piece of paper and write out all of your best points. It doesn't matter what topic, what theme, what character, write out all of your best points. Really try and analyze them. So save your time, save the time in your exam by doing it beforehand, coming up with those really good quotes and analysis, and then going online and finding synonyms for things, making sure it's really good. And that's what I would recommend doing. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so let's now have a discussion over the rest of these topics for Much Ado About Nothing. So what have we got here? We've got the Masquerade is the epitome of deception and dramatic irony. And that's very true. So a lot of things happen. Just going over the differences between the different types of irony, you've got dramatic irony, situational irony, verbal irony. So verbal irony is what we tend to refer to as sarcasm. So that's, I don't really have to explain that. It's just sarcasm. And we don't really see that too much in terms of in reading books, but you see that in plays because there's a lot of dialogue. Have I got any predictions? I don't actually have any predictions. I've not been keeping up to date with what has come up recently. I was just planning on doing a lot of revision. Am I going to do any other plays or novels? Yep. If you look at the live streams that I've scheduled, I'm doing 5 other plays and novels. So make sure you check those out. Yeah, so I don't have too many predictions because I just feel like I want to give you the content because I know a lot of creators are going through different predictions. I wouldn't possibly rely too heavily on the predictions, but you can use them to maybe guide your revision. So it's up to you. But yeah, I don't have too many suggestions, unfortunately. Sorry about that. Okay, so going back to the irony, we spoke about verbal irony. That's in verbal irony is in sarcasm, as we said. Dramatic irony is talking about foreshadowing. So you mention something that will eventually happen later on. So an example of dramatic irony, well, they talk a lot about death, as we spoke about, and then eventually they have the pretending that hero died. Oh, I can see you're putting me past paper questions in the chat. Okay, that's useful. I'm so glad that you found this live helpful. That makes my day, Chidima. You got a really nice name as well. Okay. And then finally, the last type of irony is called situational irony. So this is a lot of people get confused between dramatic irony and situational irony. Situational irony is literally when something happens, like a physical thing happens, and then something else happens that just contrasts that by a lot. For example, it raining and then the sun come up. That's situational irony. If you're looking at it in the context of weather and the meanings that that could have. Okay, so that's the different types of irony. Now, what else do we talk about? The audience are aware of something that a character or some characters are not in the play. So there's a lot of dramatic irony. So let's answer the question. Oh, they predicted deception for Much Ado About Nothing. Okay, that would be good because I literally just went over an essay with that with you guys. So that's lucky if it is, and hopefully you'll be really prepared for that. Okay. So why is the Masquerade? I'm going to ask you guys this question. Why do you think the Masquerade is the epitome of dramatic irony? Before I go and explain that. So thinking about what the Masquerade might represent, they're wearing masks. There's a sense of hidden, but at the same time, I'll just say it so the audience know which character is which character, but the characters don't know who each other are. And that's why the Masquerade is an important moment of dramatic irony, not just in Much Ado About Nothing, but in any text. So also in Romeo and Juliet, you'll see that as well. Well done. Yeah, the audience knows who the characters are. Exactly. That is why it's epitome. Exactly. Like Beatrice and Benedict know, like we know who Beatrice and Benedict are, but they do not know who each other are. Well, Beatrice actually knows who Benedict is, which I think is a good sign of her intelligence and her intellect. Now, we've got here. The physical representation of wearing masks highlights the often misconstrued verbal communication that is to follow within the play. Okay, so physically wearing masks highlights, because Much Ado About Nothing is all about, as we said, as the title suggests, a lot of occurrences happening that completely are unfounded, and everybody's just working on sort of what other people are saying as opposed to the actual events that are occurring. You can link most things to deception, like love being misunderstood and broken apart by Don John's plot and being used to bring Benedict and Beatrice together. Exactly. Yes. So misconstrued verbal communication. What is an example of when someone says something in Much Ado About Nothing and someone else interprets it in a completely different way? Well, an example in the Masquerade that happens is the interaction between Benedict and Beatrice. Beatrice is talking about how she doesn't think Benedict is good looking or a good marital partner, but she was joking. So we don't actually know to what extent this was true. And Benedict responds in total outrage. He has misconstrued what she says as if it was real and factual. Dogberry and Verges, exactly. That's where comedy comes into play. So we're talking about that is more irrational and it's a more obvious example. So what I would say Shakespeare does really well is with every point or with every specific thing that happens, there's always an explicit way of showing it and an implicit way of showing it. So the explicit way of showing misunderstanding is Claudio overhearing things as Benedict is. And I actually speak about that in my other Much Ado About Nothing videos. I would recommend you watch them. But the more implicit are actually the characters who are supposed to have high intelligence. So I think that's really interesting how Shakespeare shows that it's a human folly because it's occurring to everybody across any spectrum. Now, since the characters are unaware of who is who, it generates a series of comic misunderstandings that the audience enjoy. So, The Masquerade is also a scene of heavy comedy because remember, Much Ado About Nothing isn't a romance, it's actually a comedy. And it would be a tragedy if Hero actually died, but it's not. So it's a comedy. And that's why there's a lot of scenes of wit exchanged and a lot of people insulting each other and more more than just insulting each other, they want to show their own intelligence. So they were trying to continue this sort of metaphorical wit. And that's what we see in the first exchange between Benedict and Beatrice. Yeah, it links to it being a comedy again. Really good inference there. But there's another take that we can have on Much Ado About Nothing, and that is the idea that disguises disguises have very sinister intentions as well. If you think about crime, a lot of masks could link to crime, and that's where Don John also attends the masquerade, and he actually has an attempt to try and disrupt the relationship between Hero and Claudio by telling Claudio things about Hero, that Hero and Don Pedro wants to be together. So Claudio actually gets tricked by Don John twice in a row, which I think is just really highlights the level that he is at. Yeah, tragic comedy, but ends happily, exactly. And it ends happily, but I feel like there's a certain sadness for Hero. You know, the fact that she's now stuck with a man who literally, if Don John said one more thing out of his mouth, then Claudio will believe it and he'll completely defame his own wife. He and Claudio has some really horrible qualities. The fact that he wanted to publicly ruin Hero, not even speak to her about it and ask if this was true. I think that really highlights what kind of person he was. Okay. So the foul intentions, sinister intentions, Don John trying to convince Claudio that the prince only woos for himself. So disguises can also be quite evil and sinister and dark and luring as well. But it's not like they have to go all the way to that depth for actually anything bad to happen. The schemes weren't, Don John's schemes weren't really too well thought out. Um, because anyone could just ask, because anybody could just vouch for Hero, as Beatrice did when she was being accused that Hero was actually with Beatrice, but obviously nobody believed the women. So Don John, the only reason why his trickery worked was because of men's anxiety and lack of trust with women. We know that this was actually present from the beginning when Leonardo was there. And Don Pedro asks, "Is this your daughter?" Leonardo says, "Her mother has many times told me so," suggesting that she's had an affair. So even from the older generation to the younger generation, there's always this sense of distrust towards women. Exactly. And Don John's schemes weren't his own. So why do you think that is then? If Don John's schemes weren't his own, Borachio came up with them, then perhaps that suggests that this villainous character and the villain traits that Don John has, it's simply just an act. And it's keeping up with the fact that, as we spoke about in the essay, because he was born as illegitimate, it's manifesting that because he was born illegitimate, he needs to continue that. But obviously, perhaps naturally, he's just a normal person, he's a good person. Exactly. He's undermined as a mock villain. That's a really good point and really nice vocab there as well. For comedic effect. Perfect. Okay. So that is it there. So I think we'll end the Much Ado About Nothing here. I hope you found this live stream helpful. Obviously, I would do it for longer, but because there's so many English texts, I have to kind of multitask and make sure that a lot of people are catered for. And I know there's not enough resources for Much Ado About Nothing. I myself did this as well. So that's why I feel certain allegiance towards the people who do Much Ado About Nothing. But yeah, I hope the exam goes really, really well. I'll try and do like a mini revision short for you guys tomorrow morning. But do tell me how it goes. Maybe comment on this live. And I'll see you perhaps in another live this evening or sometime over the next couple of weeks because I'm doing a lot of subjects. Okay? So thank you so much. And yep, there will be poetry and unseen live streams completely. Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you guys, and I will see you soon. Bye for now.